Hi, I'm Isaias.
And I'm Leah.
And this is Teaching Climate Together. As you all know, Leah Thomas is one of my really good friends here in the environmental space. We've actually known each other for the last few years, and she's coined a wonderful term called Intersectional Environmentalism and founded the nonprofit Intersectional Environmentalists. And I'm just so privileged to be here today with you.
Thanks for having me. This is so cool.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think for viewers who may not really be aware of your work, Leah, before we get more into the work, I really am invested in learning more about who you are.
Hi, my name is Leah, also known as Green Girl Leah on the internet, and I'm an environmental author, content creator, nonprofit founder, and I host environmental concerts called Earth Sessions. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, a little suburb called Florissant, Missouri, and I grew up kind of running around like catching toads, like fireflies, things like that, real Midwestern upbringing. And then I went to California and started studying environmental science and policy, and that was during the time of the Ferguson uprisings back at home in St. Louis.
2010s, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 2014, I believe, 2014-15. So the Black Lives Matter movement was emerging while I was studying environmental science. So it just felt really natural to connect those two things together and see how I could use my environmental science and policy degree to, I guess, kind of help with, the social injustice issues that were arising. And at the same time, I was studying comparative world religions and learning about intersectional feminism. So I feel like all of those things just kind of meshed together, and I just was like, how can I combine my love for exploring identity and culture and feminism into my environmental work?
Can you tell us more about the importance around the work that you do? I know that event making is one of those primary categories, but really how intersectional environmentalism is much more than just a word.
Yeah, so I really think accessible education is important, and even though we both have backgrounds in environmental science, I want to make sure that anyone can kind of show up to the environmental movement exactly as they are, and that it can also be fun. So that's why I love using creativity, whether it's content creation, conversations with musicians and artists, or building community spaces together. There's always some sort of creative element to it. Even in my book, I really had fun with the layout and colors and things like that, because I want people to approach environmental education in a way where they feel kind of held and supported and also encouraged, and it doesn't have to be like a shameful thing that they're coming to. So yeah, and I think that has to do with intersectional environmentalism and kind of living it in my work, because intersectionality is all about embracing those different parts of our identities, and I want to bring that to this work as well.
And I'm curious to learn your story for getting into environmentalism, because I think a lot of people see you today as this huge public figure within the environmental climate space. And a lot of people don't really know your story or how you got started.
I don't know. My parents were activist inclined, I guess. I don't even want to say that fully, but they did take us to protests. Like, my mom would be like, I'll pay you $20 if you read The New Jim Crow, or things like that.
Political education.
Yeah, so they were really about speaking up for ourselves. My dad encouraged my sister in elementary school to make a petition, and when she got in trouble, he went to the school and kind of went off on the principal and was like, my daughters have the right to protest.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I've had that in me, I think, thanks to my parents. So it's not like I necessarily wanted to be an environmentalist. I never would have even considered that. Even studying environmental science, I felt really disconnected from my studies because I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. When I was able to recontextualize environmentalism, I realized I guess I was an environmentalist all along, or I always cared for the earth in my own way, in my own cultural way. And that same with my grandmother. And yeah, I was like, I guess I kind of am an environmentalist. So I feel like I stumbled into it sometimes.
I love the title and the word of environmentalist because, you know, as kids growing up, a lot of us probably identify with doctor, like firefighter, a teacher, and there's very direct pathways of what that looks like. But I think with the environmentalist, what you're trying to say is like, it's not really like so clear for a lot of people. Yeah. And I think that's the unique thing about this is that environmentalists really don't characterize themselves within one lane. It's like multiple lanes. So I'm curious to know, like, what was that one lane that you were first introduced to that eventually got you expanded into these different spaces?
I would say, and yeah, I love that you said that because I really intentionally use the word environmentalist because it's oftentimes associated with like older, white, conservationist focused type people, but I'm trying to show people that you can do what we're doing and also be an environmentalist. You can be an urban farmer and also be an environmentalist, or a fashion designer who upcycles. So that's why I use the word, and I really want to reclaim it and help other people reclaim it. For me, I think environmental communications was how I became an environmentalist, which I didn't even know was a field. But I was blogging about natural hair care and Black women's beauty when I was in college with the actress Kimberly Elise, who's super cool. She's in so many things. She's the bus driver in the movie Dope, if you've seen that. Yeah. But I worked with her when I was in college, and it was by way of learning about natural hair, natural beauty, all of those sorts of things.
More of a cultural connection.
Yeah, it was absolutely. I never framed it that way, but that's super spot on. It was like a culture first, and then, oh yeah, I guess I am an environmentalist. It just felt really natural and just what my interests were.
But when you were younger, you felt that like it was really hard for a term to really describe yourself with your peers or other people in the industry of like, what does that actually look like beyond the standard environmentalist that either works for an NGO or some, you know, sustainability company. Like, you really were trying to understand what you were trying to do in undergrad. And I'm curious to know, like, you know, because we're both environmental science majors, is what are those classes that you felt that really influenced you to start asking more critical questions that helped you theorize intersectional environmentalism?
Yeah, it's so wild because I just did not connect. Like, I have a group of POC students, Jesse and Karina and Tyler, like my really close friends, yeah, from college. And we didn't really fit into the rest of our environmental program. And everybody just seemed like so, okay. Sunny. Is she in the bag?
So you chose environmental science as your major, but it's such a broad major. I think that you can go into different categories, but I feel that your inspiration of how you got intersectional environmentalism wasn't just through one class. It was like a multiple of lanes that you put yourself through. So I'm really just curious to know, like, what were those courses or fields that really started to have you have more dialogue with yourself?
It's interesting because I really wasn't that interested in a lot of my classes, but
yeah,
I think
you're kind of bored.
Yeah, maybe that's just like a college experience, and I felt so, I don't know, I think it's funny that I'm doing this, especially in a public capacity, because there were people in my major who were like so into it, and I just wasn't. Like, I feel bad that wasn't me. Like, I didn't feel it. But I think the classes that made sense, it was actually like a sociology class where I was examining race and class and privilege. So that made me gravitate more towards environmentalism by way of social justice. I took a GIS, Geographic Information Systems class with maps. And that's when I started actually like applying environmental justice data and visualizing it. And I was so fascinated by that, like, oh my God, like, it's in the water, it's in the air, like environmental injustice is everywhere. When I could actually visualize the data, that felt so cool. And it made me think like, okay, if I can visualize this data, what else can I do to help people understand what environmental justice is? And kind of started to spark my environmental communications journey because I was just so impacted by those data visualizations. And I also took an ecofeminism class, and I thought it was great, but then I was like, well, where are all the Black people? Like, who are we learning about in this class? Yeah. And it was so odd to me because we were talking about like Eastern religions and indigenous traditions, but not a lot of credit was actually being given to those women of color. So that made me, my frustrations with a lot of my classes actually sparked me doing things outside that brought me to intersectional environmentalism. So I was just a really angsty college student, and in my classes wanted to be learning about things that I wasn't taught, and that's what I think made me do this, yeah.
Now we're here today at Kenneth Hahn Park near Crenshaw, where we are next to the Inglewood oil field that's right behind us. And Leah, I just want to talk more about the concept around intersectional environmentalism and how we can really visualize this, because I think the term environmental racism at times can be confusing for some people. So do you want to talk more about that term?
Absolutely. I think it's really important for people to ask the question who in addition to what when it comes to intersectional environmentalism. So the what, or the problem, as we can clearly see, are these not so great oil fields that are here. But if you take it one step further and you ask, like, who is this actually impacting? Like you mentioned, we're in a primarily Black and brown community in Los Angeles that's being exposed to all the harmful chemicals or pollution, etc., that this oil field is causing. So intersectional environmentalism is asking us to take it one step further by asking who these environmental hazards are happening to.
And I think that, you know, it's so true where people try to play devil's advocate of what came first, the chicken or the egg. And then in this case, it'd be like, what came first, the oil field or the poor Black and brown community? But when you look at history of redlining, for example, in LA, that we're known for doing that, you could see that a lot of these communities don't have a choice and they can't move today anymore.
Yeah, a lot of this dates back to housing discrimination, and Hazel M. Johnson, who's also known as the mother of environmental justice from Chicago, termed this toxic donut. So a lot of Black and brown communities that historically face housing discrimination live in what's called a toxic donut. So what does that mean? I know donuts are good, but when they're toxic, it's bad. So they're essentially surrounded by things like this and also other toxic waste sites and facilities, landfills, and so many environmental hazards. So at some point, you have to realize that that is intentional if we're seeing these toxic donuts specifically in Black and brown communities.
The work of environmental justice leaders is so important, and I know you mentioned Hazel M. Johnson as the mother of the environmental justice movement, how there's been so many continuous environmental justice elders that have really paved the way to define it today. And I think that's really powerful to note that these concepts of these like actual industries that are causing pollution to these communities are not new. It's been the same phenomenon for decades. And I know that within intersectional environmentalism, you cite a lot about the origins about the environmental justice movement, which I'm very interested in finding out.
I love history, and I think we can learn so much from the past. And when it comes to the 60s and 70s, that's when we saw a lot of civil rights organizing, and then also the Earth Day movement, which led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and a lot of the environmental legislation that we have today. They nickname it alphabet soup because all of a sudden, because of that organizing in the 60s and 70s, we got the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and also the Environmental Protection Agency. However, because a lot of the organizers of that original Earth Day movement didn't partner with the civil rights organizers, they kind of just, I think a kind way to say it, adopted some of their tactics for their own gain. Yes, we got all of this incredible environmental legislation, but they could have learned a lot from the civil rights movement. So we had to have an environmental justice movement in the 80s because there were so many Black and brown folks who were saying, okay, cool, we have civil rights legislation, and cool, we've got like the Clean Air Act and stuff like that. But what's happening is our air isn't actually clean. So maybe some of the white suburban communities are having clean air, or some of the, you know, wealthier communities have better things, but what about us?
When we look at these fossil fuel industries right behind us, we think they're a natural part of the environment today. I mean, like, if you look around Kenneth Hahn Park right now, you'll see a lot of Black and brown families just laying on the grass, having a picnic. But these systems that we see right behind us are not natural. And I think with intersectional environmentalism, Leah, if someone were to come up to you and they're just trying to understand more about what is intersectional environmentalism, how would you best explain it to them while also showcasing this example?
Short answer, I would say intersectional environmentalism is making sure you're protecting people and the planet which sounds super obvious. So to take it a couple steps further, intersectional environmentalism to me explores the ways that social justice, identity, and things like that intersect with environmentalism. And to take it a couple steps further, I would also say an intersectional approach to environmentalism considers which communities are most impacted by an environmental hazard or the climate crisis, and makes sure that their voices are centered and that they have a seat at the table in decision-making rooms, because oftentimes that's not the case. And as you and I both know, the communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis and environmental injustice are not reflected enough when it comes to environmental policy and leadership.
Yeah, and I love the policy component because this actually helps illustrate cases against lawsuits in California against fossil fuel industries. As you know, there's a lot of laws that are passing right now to hold fossil fuel corporations accountable that are also trying to undo policies to further, expand oil well drilling in urban areas. Knowing the data and facts helps us inform the ways that we choose policy. And there's a fact that you shared recently that 60% of our health is determined by environmental conditions and 30% is based on genetics. So it is insane to see now here in Los Angeles that a lot of Black and brown people of color have related disease illnesses just based on their environmental conditions. And I think that this is just a really prime example of how intersectional environmentalism can be used. And this is what kind of led you to create your nonprofit back in 2020, is that when you had that momentum, right? You had all these people just saying, I want to be an intersectional environmentalist. How was that nonprofit development going?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, never in a million years did I think that like hundreds of thousands of people would want to learn about intersectional environmentalism and environmental justice history. But I was like, if the moment is here, I'm going to do everything I can to get resources to people that are as accessible as possible. Because like you mentioned, there's a lot of communities, like for example, I grew up in a primarily Black community in St. Louis, Missouri. My sister has asthma, a lot of people I know have asthma, and we just kind of thought that it was something that was hereditary, and I feel like the Black community was almost blamed for that. But we didn't know that 70% of African Americans live in counties that frequently violate federal air quality standards. So having that information, I think, is really important, so communities can say oh, okay, these problems that we're having, it's not necessarily our fault, it's a product of the environments that we're living in.
Absolutely, and this goes to show that intersectional environmentalism is more than just a tool to use. It's actually an embodiment to then become a better citizen of the earth, because that's what intersectional environmentalism is doing. So Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So Leah, you talk about, having to go through this undergrad experience, learning all these different fields. Was it hard for you to find community? Because I think for a lot of marginalized environmentalists, that most environmental majors in different states, they're not diverse majors.
Yeah, it was definitely hard for me to find community. The school I went to, the Black population was an asterisk. We weren't even 1% of the school population. And yeah, it was really interesting, but I found a group of kind of POC students in my program, actually my last year as an environmental science student. They came in as juniors, as transfer students, and that ended up being my group of college friends that I'm still really close to today. So I did feel really out of place for a long time. Even in science labs, I felt out of place. I remember one time I was just trying to titrate something, and there was a guy in my lab. He kept asking me if I was from Compton and what I was gonna do for Father's Day, because of course I didn't have a father. And it was really, because I'm my dad is at home, my dad is chilling, I do have a dad, but even if I didn't,
I have a stable family relationship, unlike you.
Yeah, and getting weird questions where you're just trying to be in a science lab and you're getting these kind of racially coded questions, or in my environmental science classes, it was really hard to focus because there was a brewing civil rights, social justice movement that was happening, and I just felt like people in my class didn't care. And maybe that was judgmental of me, but if they did care, they weren't talking about it, so I just felt really out of place. But eventually I did find community, and I started realizing okay, just because I go to a PWI, predominantly white institution, there are other schools and historically Black colleges and universities that do talk about environmental justice, and like maybe I could find community like digitally and in person. So after a certain point when you're not finding community, I feel like it is important to be like, you know what? I want to be in this space. I deserve to be in this space. This school is actually not going to provide that for me. So like, how can I find it outside of the classroom? And that's what I think really changed my outlook on everything. Did you have that experience at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think for like, obviously I don't relate to Black environmentalists because I'm Latino myself, but I think that it is true how prevalent anti-Blackness really operates for a lot of Black environmentalists. But I think as a Latino environmentalist, there is a lot of things where I tell people it's not that we just don't see ourselves in those spaces, it's the way that we're treated, the ways that we're characterized, and the assumptions that are made. And I definitely had a lot of times, a bit different from yours, where I was in a lab and my lab mentor said, or lab professor said, I wish Mexicans cared more about the environment, but they don't. And he kind of used me as like examples, like, but you're one of those people who is, you know, paving the way, but you know, it's sad that your community doesn't care. But I think I was very scared to push back, and I think that's the thing. It's like the being reprimanded for trying to speak your opinion in academic institutions is not allowed, and I resonate with that. But I think that the world events that were a bit disconnected was very obvious for a lot of people on that end.
Yeah, that's wild. Like, and people would just say stuff like that. Things are changing, but a couple years ago, like, people would wild out, like at some of the biggest environmental nonprofits, agencies, companies. I've worked at many of them, and you've had experiences with many of them. Like, people would say the most out-of-pocket things, just like, what does social justice have to do with environmentalism? Or like, oh, maybe we'll talk about these issues, like, if we have time and can get the carbon out of the atmosphere. And like the dismissive nature of like Black and brown students' experience was so prevalent, and it kind of still is in different ways, especially like as they're trying to ban DEI at so many schools.
Oh, yeah, critical race theory. It's the same for environmental justice being seen as too political. I think there's a lot to be said with, you know, marginalized experience, but again, we talk about it as if like we're not saying it was 10, 20 years ago. It was literally 5 years ago that we were in undergrad. Like, it's not so much of a huge time difference, and to see that these same narratives are being repeated. But, you know, I'm very curious to know that, you know, people have been following Green Girl Leah for years now, but when did you create that account, and what inspired you to create it?
I started it in, I guess, 2016, 2017, my senior year of college. And it really was because I like thought I wanted to be like a food blogger or something. But the thing is, I'm like not that good of a cook. And I was pretending.
Hey, it's okay, we all start somewhere.
And back in the day, that's when, plant-based bloggers were taking off, and I was vegetarian at the time. So I did a lot of like vegan recipes and things like that. But it didn't feel super authentic. I was also doing a lot of green beauty reviews and content. So yeah, that's kind of at the heart of why I started it. And it's also something I'm really interested in. So I just started it because of that reason. And then little by little, I started to gain community of other kind of like Black and brown women that also cared about eco-friendly living. And then over time it became, I guess in 2020, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, my platform started to shift where I was talking about environmental justice a bit more. And it's interesting because when I first started, I kind of shied away from discussing heavier topics.
Around race, because it wasn't really a popular, it was met with, in this sort of way of like, people were not invested in learning more about history. They're more invested in what's in your trash jar.
Right, that's all they cared about, which I understand, like, is also cool, but I never would have thought that the intersection of social justice or culture and climate would be the thing that would garner a following. So in some ways I kind of like that, and that's why I call myself like an accidental activist, because like I couldn't have imagined, and then was just like, okay, this is cool, people are following me, like maybe I'll talk about this more. And I just saw it as an opportunity to like, I don't know, help play a small role in reshaping environmental education to like center justice and also just like cultural competency, I guess.
You talk about that viral moment in 2020, and there's a specific post that I would say is what really people remember you online for, which is this infamous post of Environmentalists for Black Lives Matter. And I think you called attention to the issues of environmentalism, but also what was happening in our movements, digitally speaking, of what was being presented. I really want to know more, like, what were you thinking during that time and what were you going through?
Yeah, I was unemployed. I was furloughed from my job, so it was a very confusing time. It was a pandemic. I was scared, was isolated, and there's also protests that I just was like, I'm not outside. Like, I'm scared that I might get sick, and I'm not protesting the way that I usually do. Like, I need to do something. And I was also so angry at this time. And I think anger is an important emotion to acknowledge, especially as like a hippy-dippy type person.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think that I'm just like breezing through life in a fairy-like way, but I was pissed off at the environmental community for not standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement in large part. But then I was seeing people like you standing up and realizing like, wait, if we could connect these people together and mobilize, like so many of us do care. So I just wrote about intersectional environmentalism. At the time, I just thought I'm an intersectional feminist, I'm an intersectional environmentalist, and I don't want anything to do with, just like I don't want to be a part of non-intersectional feminism that doesn't care about the advancement of women of color, of trans women, of queer women, etc. Maybe I could be a part of this intersectional form of environmentalism that I'm seeing people like you display, and Jose Gonzalez and Teresa Baker and Patagonia, and just exit this other movement and be a part of this movement that maybe doesn't have a formal name necessarily, but like a bunch of environmental justice advocates who care about a variety of different issues. So I made the post, it popped off, and then what really I think changed things for me after that post went viral, a columnist at Vogue reached out and was like, yo, we saw that intersectional environmentalism is like not trending on Google, but has a ton of Google searches like in a week. Like, do you want to write about it? So that was like one of the first pieces that I wrote. So it was the post, and then all of a sudden a post from Vogue, and people were like, who is she? Like, where did she come from? Who is this girl?
What were some of the initial responses from the community in terms of pushback, I would say?
Yeah, something that I feel like I've just processed is like how scary that time was and how much pressure that time was, because suddenly hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world were messaging me positive things, negative things, following me, asking me what to do next. There were companies, including my former employer, that's like, hey, help us reshape our mission, or, you know, environmental organizations like the Sierra Club. It was a lot, and suddenly I just was like, I have a microphone that's pointed at me, and I just feel something in my heart is telling me to speak. Like, I just felt like it was a responsibility to say something, because I was like, whenever in life are people just gonna be like, teach us about intersectional environmentalism? So it was cool. It felt like such an honor and such a privilege, but also like I was scared, and I think I wore it well, but I wish that I could have been more transparent with people. I think there were a lot of people who were down and wanted to build community together, and there were a lot of people who were like, who the F are you? Like, where did you come from? You don't deserve to be here. I've been doing this for a long time. Why do you deserve a microphone? And it was so hard because I was navigating multiple truths. Like, yes, suddenly I was being platformed in a way that I had never imagined. And it was also something that I didn't want. And I know that that sounds bad, but like, I'm a pretty shy and reserved person. Like, I didn't want to be a spokesperson, but I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. But I'm like, if this is happening, I need to do it and do what I can to also show people like, yo, this isn't just about me. And that's why we started Intersectional Environmentalists. And again, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, can we build a council or a coalition? Because there's so much like energy that's being directed towards this post, but the only reason I created this post or even this term is because of people like you and Christy and Teresa, people that I saw embodying what is now called intersectional environmentalism. But that was so much to manage, and then to try to build a team and then pay a team and do like content partnerships. That's what funded the creation of IE, is like literally me doing content partnerships. And I was like, how can I, So it was a lot of pressure. There was also a lot of people who would say, you know, like, you don't deserve this, or who are you? Or they felt like I wasn't educated enough, or that I came out of nowhere, or that like, I don't know.
An industry plan.
An industry plan.
For the environmental movement, yeah.
And it was hard, but I think I'm so grateful for that experience, because now I know myself, and I'm like, I deserve to be here just as much as, you know, the next person, and there's always going to be people who don't like you.
I mean, I think it kind of speaks volume to movement spaces, that even within activist spaces, there is a purity culture, but almost this thing where I think we kind of grow up with the same experiences of my environmental activism journey in college. She was always seen as, do not center yourself, always center those who want to be centered and deserve to be centered. Yeah. But it was those experiences that you kind of added your cultural analysis of what you saw, and you weren't even hoping for a post to go viral. You're just like, this is what I think that we should be doing as a society and as environmentalists. Like, we should at least commit ourselves to helping for what we can. And I think that for a lot of people at the times, that it's not so much about you going viral, it's about the fact that the impact you had. And I think you gave the right words to individuals to finally describe something that was more illustrative to their experience. And I think that's where media spaces and also Generation Z and millennials are really paving that way, is that we really are trying to find the right words to validate our experiences. But I think, you know, beyond the academic literature or even the theory, how does that embody in your personal life relationships? Because I think intersectional environmentalism isn't just about the thought process and the practice, it's also the ways that we actually begin to navigate the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like community is so important to me. I don't know, maybe it's just the way that like my family raised me, and I guess I'm just so inspired by so many different people in this space. I know this isn't like the best or the most like coherent example, but I just had so many amazing mentors who are like super humble and chill and do things in community, that I feel like I want to bring that into the work that I do, I guess. And maybe that also has to be with like being a little shy and neurospicy, I don't know.
I think the shyness is something that people may not recognize for a lot of public figures. I mean, it's the same for like probably celebrities, is that they have high social anxiety. Like, I think both of us talk about how anxious we can be in public, and I think it's just because that's who we are as individuals. Like, we're not really people who like to be socially out in that way. But I think that it kind of is a testament to the cultures that are being founded now, that you're really expanding into new levels. And I think that's just the evolution of intersectional environmentalism, is that what it meant in 2020 is different in 2024.
Oh, totally.
And I think that's really unique, is that the term itself is unique for each and every individual.
Totally. And I love that. And even like the way college students have taken intersectional environmentalism and ran with it. Like, when I speak with colleges, we're like, okay, yeah, this is the intro. And that makes me want to cry and just close up shop and go away and be on a commune. Because I'm like, I did what I wanted to do. I wrote the textbook that I wanted to have. And it's so cool to see like first year students read it. So then by the time they're a senior, they're not like, everything I'm talking about is like the basics, and their brains are elsewhere, and they're like degrowth, solar puck, like
they know all these terms now, unlike us. I mean, that's the thing about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, is that they know so much more than what we did.
And, so cool.
And it's beautiful, because you're giving back to those communities, but it's also this form of, that's what you wanted to do. Is that you just wanted to give the right words.
And I want people to grow and write other books and expand on it. And whatnot. So yeah, I just feel so lucky that I could like help introduce the dialogue. And I think in my book I say like, I hope one day we don't have to preface environmentalism with the word intersectional, and that environmentalism will be like inherently intersectional, and like nobody will even need to read my book because there will just be like a common understanding like, no duh, we're supposed to care about people. And I feel like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like they're doing that. So hopefully this little book will become obsolete. My publisher is going to be like,
I think it's more legacy.
don't say that. Like, but I hope when people read it, they'll be like, dang, in 2020 they didn't know this? And I'll be like, yeah.
You've been able to build such large multimedia platforms, from Green Girl Leah to Intersectional Environmentalists, but now there's a new project that you've been working on, and I kind of want to tap into that. Like, what is that new project you've been working on?
Yeah, so I formally launched my production company, which is called Green Girl Productions, and I produce different events, and one of them is called Earth Sessions, which is a climate and music series, and we've been piloting it over the last 2 years with over 20 events, which is so wild. But we work with a lot of musicians and activists and just try to put people together in one room to just learn about music and environmental action in a really fun and accessible way.
What was the inspiration to choose music? Because I think that when we think about environmentalism, we only think about policy, we only think about conservation, but we sometimes kind of fail to understand, like you said, like there's intersectionality of those fields.
I think there were so many musicians who supported IE when we began. There's a guy named Charlie Berg who has a song, and he put up like a quote that I did in one of his songs and did a t-shirt fundraiser. There are also even people like Shawn Mendes and, you know, Camila Cabello, etc. Like Shawn let us take over his platform, etc. So the first people who were really receptive about intersectional environmentalism were actually a ton of musicians and artists.
Well, they have the largest influence too, right? Like compared to actors, like they actually are able to impact more people.
Totally. So I just was like, I also just love music. I play guitar, not very well. I was in a band in high school called After School Lunch. But yeah, I just love music, love writing, and I just wanted to kind of bring it into my work a bit more. And then I realized there's a really big gap, I guess, in the music space. There's kind of like big sustainability things like Coldplay making their tour more sustainable, but there's so many artists who are looking to get involved and don't know how, so I wanted to kind of create that pathway.
I love that because musicians, right, like we said, have the largest influence, but a lot of them sometimes feel embarrassed or they don't know where to start. And I think that's really cool that Earth Sessions was able to do that. What are some of your favorite shows that, first of all, I want to know, how was the first show producing it? Because it's not easy to create those events, but also what are some of your favorite artists that you've had at Earth Sessions?
Our first show was in New York with Charlie Berg and an artist named Maya Blaney. And then our next show that I really loved was in Los Angeles with an artist named X and Bedouin. And oh my God, it was so fun. It was so experimental. We honestly had no idea what we were doing. But I don't know, like I'm sure there are details that I should be sharing, but I don't even know how we did it and pulled it off with like a team of 3 people, but we did somehow, and it's been really fun. And I guess some of the favorite artists I've worked with, this wasn't formally Earth Sessions, but Ash Nico is a really cool artist.
I love that art.
I love
They have
Ash
a really
Nico.
great brand too. Yeah.
And we got to interview Ash Nico for the Earth Sessions project, and then when Ash was releasing a new album or EP, had a conversation with their fans about environmentalism, and Ash is just like such a character that was so fun, like and just so genuinely into the environment. And again, you wouldn't assume that, but then if you look at them visually, you're like, yeah, they're like this cool fairy person that's just walking around and like harvesting mushrooms. Other people, Umi was a dream artist to work with.
I love that show. That was probably one of my favorites. Like I'm obsessed with her music.
That was amazing. And Ravina, Mila Woods. These are it's not fair because all the people you work with are like my favorite artists. So it's
a little bit biased.
Yeah, it's complete bias.
What's been the feedback though with people who, you know, they don't come from the music field, or sometimes they don't come from the environmental field? What have you gotten from those feedbacks?
From one of the artists, so like Ravina said that it was her favorite show of the year, which was really sweet. So we get a lot of artist feedback. They're like, I've never done something like this before and I want to do more of it. And then from the audience, I remember there was a music person that came up to me at the Umi show and was like, I get what you're doing here. Like, you know, the earth, never really thought about it, but I will now. So it's cool that our audience is sometimes like 50% music people, 50% environmental people. And then other times, like honestly at the Ravina show, that was the first time that over 60% of the people came because they wanted to see Ravina, and they weren't just like environmental people, but they left hopefully as environmental people with like a free educational book, and like they kind of had to sit through a lecture on queer ecology and environmental racism. So yeah, it's been really cool.
And who are some of your dream artists that you'd love to have in the future?
Dream artist would be Janae Aiko.
I love her.
FKJ, French Kiwi Juice. I think if I work with Janae Aiko, I'll just be happy forever. So.
What about SZA?
SZA, I would love to. We DM'd SZA and told her about Earth Sessions, and she said, sounds cool. And then she tweeted, she's like, I really just want to have like an eco performance in nature. So we're really trying to make that happen. But she does follow IE, she reposts her stuff, and she said, cool, it sounds cool. So
it's an open door now. I think it's up to her and you all to work together. I'm manifesting it for next year, like some type of Climatechella that you all end up creating on that end. Yeah. But no, I love that. And I think for young people who maybe see these events and they're like, I have no connections, I have nothing, I don't know how to start. I think that it's untrue. Like you've really showcased with Earth Sessions that it's a grassroots collective project. Like they're for everyone. They're not just like for exclusive people.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're releasing our first website this year, and then just even being able to say we've done over 20 events. It sounds so wild in that.
Large impact.
Yeah, I worked with some of my favorite artists, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. We do want to try to imagine something. Remember that mushroom festival that we went to, even though I didn't see you?
Yes.
I was like, people are doing this, and a lot of people showed up, so maybe we could do an Earth Sessions like this.
There's a desire for it,
you know?
Yeah, and I love that. And I think the future of environmentalism isn't just one way. It's going to be multi-dimensional creatives coming together, because you work from musicians, videographers, photographers, poets, writers, like tarot card readers. Like you had people there reading my whole life history at one event, and I think it's a testament of time of like, these are the ways that we actually communicate with people. I think that we could talk a lot about the data and science, which are always important and are also stories. But I think for the general public, and this is something that I feel that you're really pushing against those boundaries, is like, you're not just reaching the same audience anymore. You're really trying to go into the depths of different spaces, and you're saying, look, I don't expect you to become an intersectional environmentalist. I just expect you to start understanding these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some things that you would tell your younger self or other people out there who maybe don't identify with that term yet, and they're still trying to understand who they are?
I would tell them to find the terms that call to you. I think intersectional environmentalism, I enjoy it. And there are also so many other terms that I really enjoy, like eco-womanism, etc. And there's something beautiful about going on a journey and knowing that like everything won't be for everyone, and it's kind of our duty to discover ourselves and find like what works for us. And I love language, and it's meant to evolve, but I think it's a beautiful term, but I know there's so many others out there, and I really want people to go on that journey of self-discovery to find what they align with.
And I know that, you know, we were so young when we first started in this movement. I think we were like in our early 20s, and now we're in our late 20s, and I think it's just comes back to full circle, aka intersectional environmentalism, is that we're constantly learning in this process. We're constantly trying to understand the systems that are constantly plundering our communities. But we also have those solutions that exist. And I think that your term illustrates beautifully that, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're in policy or writing or other things. Like, it matters how authentic and true you are to yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again for joining me, Leah Thomas. I am so privileged to be your friend, and also the relationships that we've built the last few years, I would say, and just constantly just having that inner light with yourself to stay true in this space.
Thank you. Is that a tuba? Yeah, a lot of this is important. I think specifically